Hello everyone, welcome back to today's story. In this episode, we follow James and Tu Diep as their lives take a dramatic turn after one life-changing decision. When
Don't
James
worry,
walks
it's gonna be
away
okay.
from his powerful
I didn't mean
position
to lose my
and
temper.
leaves everything behind, he believes he's choosing freedom and love. But what comes next is far more dangerous than either of them expected. As Tu Diep becomes the target of threats and intimidation from the chairman himself, fear begins to close in from every direction. But when everything spirals out of control, James is forced to confront the past he tried to escape. Stay until the end to witness how far someone can go to protect the person they love. And don't forget to subscribe to help us reach 500 subscribers. Your support truly means the world to us. Beneath a grey, heavy sky, the paperwork sat quietly on the wooden table. Simple sheets of resignation documents that carried the weight of an entire life. James stared at them for a long moment before finally picking up the pen. There was no hesitation left in his eyes this time, no doubt. No turning back. "I'm done," he said softly, almost to himself, as he signed his name. Tu Diep stood nearby, watching in silence. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to stop him, because deep down, she already knew. This decision wasn't sudden. It had been building inside him for a long time, growing heavier with every day he stayed trapped in a life that was never truly his. When he placed the pen down, it felt like something invisible had finally broken free. "It's over," James said, looking at her. "I've submitted everything. By tomorrow, I'm no longer part of that company." There was no celebration, no relief-filled laughter. Just a quiet stillness between them, because both of them understood. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something much more dangerous. The next morning, everything changed. Tu Diep was walking home from the market, her hands still holding a small basket of fresh vegetables, when she noticed something strange. A black car parked at the end of the dirt road. Engine still running, windows darkened, her steps slowed. Something felt wrong. Before she could react, the car door suddenly opened. Two men stepped out. "Tu Diep," one of them called, his voice cold, controlled. She froze. "Yes." They walked closer, their expressions unreadable. "The chairman wants to talk to you." Her heart dropped instantly. The chairman, James's father. The man James had spent his whole life trying to escape. I don't know anything," she said quickly, instinctively stepping back. But they didn't stop. "You don't need to know anything," the other man said. "You just need to come with us." Her grip tightened around the basket. Fear crept up her spine. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice shaking now. The man smiled faintly. That wasn't a request. That afternoon, Tu Diep sat inside a luxurious office she had never imagined entering. Everything felt suffocating. The silence, the cold air, the power that filled the room. And then, the door opened. He walked in slowly. The chairman. An older man, sharp eyes, calm expression. But behind that calmness was something far more dangerous. He looked at her like she was nothing more than a problem. "So," he said, taking a seat across from her, "you're the reason my son threw everything away." Tu Diep lowered her eyes, unable to speak. "I didn't. Don't lie." His voice wasn't loud, but it cut straight through her. "I warned him," the The chairman continued. I gave him everything, a future, a legacy, and yet he chose you. Each word felt heavier than the last. Tu Diep clenched her hands. I never asked him to leave, she whispered. The chairman leaned forward slightly. But he did, for you. A long silence filled the room. Then his expression changed, colder. Do you know what happens to people who ruin my plans? Her heart started racing. I don't want any trouble. You already are trouble. He stood up slowly, and I don't tolerate problems. That night, Tu Diep couldn't sleep. Every word from that meeting echoed in her mind. Every look, every threat, hidden beneath calm words. And then, her phone rang, an unknown number. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. Hello. No answer, just silence. Then, a voice, low, controlled. You should stay away from James. Her breath caught. Who is this? You already know. The line went dead. Tu Diep stared at the phone, her heart pounding uncontrollably. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was a threat. The next few days became a nightmare. It started small, strange people watching her from a distance, footsteps behind her at night, her door left slightly open when she was sure she had locked it. Then it escalated. Her basket of bamboo shoots was thrown onto the ground at the market. Her customers suddenly stopped coming. Whispers spread. She's the reason James lost everything. She's trouble. She's dangerous. Tu Diep tried to stay strong, tried to ignore it, but the pressure kept building, and she was alone, completely alone. Meanwhile, James was unaware of how far things had gone. He had already left the company, cut off from everything, no more meetings, no more reports, no more control. For the first time in years, he was free, but that freedom came with a cost. He had no idea that the war had just begun. One evening, as the sky turned dark, Tu Diep hurried home earlier than usual. Something felt off again. Too quiet, too still. As she reached her door, she stopped. It was slightly open. Her heart dropped. Slowly, she pushed it open. Hello? No response. She stepped inside carefully. The room was dark, too dark. And then, a sound behind her. She turned. A hand grabbed her arm violently. She screamed, "Let go of me!" But the grip tightened. "You should have listened," a voice whispered coldly. Her whole body froze. She struggled, but it was useless. Panic flooded her mind. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was something much worse. And in that moment, Tu Diep realized she might not make it out of this. Far away, James stood alone outside, staring at the night sky. Something felt wrong. A strange, unexplainable feeling, like something important was slipping away. His chest tightened. Without thinking, he reached for his phone and called her. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. A cold wave ran through him. Tu Diep, for the first time since he left everything behind, fear hit him. Real fear. And deep down, he knew something had happened. The moment the call didn't go through, James didn't wait another second. He grabbed his jacket and rushed out, his mind racing faster than his heartbeat. Every instinct inside him was screaming the same thing. She was in danger. And this time, it wasn't just a feeling. Back in the darkened house, Tu Diep struggled with everything she had left. Her arm was pinned behind her back, pain shooting through her shoulder as she tried to break free. The man's grip was like iron, unforgiving, deliberate. "Stop struggling," he said coldly. "You're making this harder for yourself." "I didn't do anything," she cried, her voice breaking. "That's not for you to decide." Her breath became uneven, panic taking over her senses. She tried to twist away, but it only made things worse. The second man stepped forward, closing the distance, his presence suffocating. "You should have stayed away from him," he added quietly. The words hit her like a final confirmation. This wasn't random. This was planned. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees as if the world itself was warning of what was happening inside. And then, headlights cut through the darkness. A car stopped abruptly in front of the house. The door slammed. Fast footsteps approached. Inside, one of the men turned his head slightly. "Someone's here." Before they could react, the door burst open. "Let her go." James. His voice echoed through the room, sharp and furious like never before. Tu Diep's eyes widened instantly. "James!" Relief and fear collided inside her at the same time. But the men didn't back down. Instead, they tightened their grip. "You shouldn't have come," one of them said calmly. James stepped forward, his gaze locked onto them. "I said, let her go." There was no hesitation in his voice, no fear, only anger, pure, controlled anger. For a brief moment, everything stood still. Then, one of the men pushed Tu Diep aside and lunged forward. James reacted instantly. The two clashed, the sound of impact breaking the silence of the night. It wasn't clean. It wasn't controlled. It was raw, desperate. James wasn't fighting like a businessman anymore. He was fighting like someone who had nothing left to lose. Tu Diep crawled backward, her body trembling as she watched the chaos unfold. "Stop. Please stop," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. But no one listened. The second man tried to grab James from behind, but James turned just in time, pushing him away with force. Everything happened too fast, too violently, and yet somehow, James kept standing. Finally, after what felt like forever, the men stepped back, not defeated, but calculating. "This isn't over," one of them said coldly, adjusting his sleeve. They exchanged a glance, then walked out, just like that, as if everything that had just happened meant nothing. The silence that followed was overwhelming. James stood there, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling as adrenaline slowly faded. Then he turned. "Tu Diep." His voice softened instantly. She ran to him without thinking and collapsed into his arms. "I was so scared," she sobbed. James held her tightly, one hand gently resting on the back of her head. "I'm here," he whispered. "You're safe now." But even as he said it, he knew this wasn't over, not even close. Later that night, they sat together in the dim light of the small house. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The weight of everything that had happened lingered in the air. Finally, Tu Diep broke the silence. "They won't stop, will they?" James didn't answer immediately because he knew the truth. "No," he said quietly. Her hands trembled. "Then what do we do?" James looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, there was no hesitation left in him. "We stop running." The next morning, James made a decision, not just to protect her, but to end it. once and for all. He returned to the city, not as an employee, not as a son following orders, but as someone who was ready to face everything head-on. Inside the chairman's office, the atmosphere was colder than ever. The moment James walked in, the chairman didn't look surprised, almost like he had been expecting this. "You came back," the chairman said calmly. James stood tall. "I'm ending this." A faint smile appeared on the chairman's lips. "You already tried. You failed." James shook his head. "No. I walked away." He stepped closer. "But now, I'm choosing to fight." The room fell silent, a silent battle between two men who shared blood, but nothing else. "You think you can protect her?" the chairman asked. James didn't flinch. "I don't think," he replied. "I will." For the first time, something changed in the chairman's expression. Not anger, not frustration, but recognition. "You're serious?" he said. James didn't answer. He didn't need to. A long pause followed. Then, the chairman leaned back slightly. "Fine." That single word shifted everything. "I'll stop." James narrowed his eyes slightly. "You expect me to believe that?" The chairman looked at him. "This was never about the girl," he said slowly. "It was about you." James stayed silent. "You were always too soft," the chairman continued, "too willing to throw everything away." Another pause. "But now, you've chosen." The tension in the room slowly faded. Not completely, but enough. "If you're willing to give up everything for her," the chairman said, "then live with that choice." He stood up. "And don't come back." James didn't say another word. He turned and walked out. This time, for real. Days later, the world felt different. Not because everything was perfect, but because the fear was gone. The threat stopped. The shadows disappeared. And for the first time, peace returned. Back in the small house, sunlight poured through the window. Tu Diep stood outside, holding a basket of fresh bamboo shoots, the same simple life she had always known. But now, it felt different, lighter, safer. Behind her, footsteps approached. James, no suit, no title, no expectations, just him. "You're up early," he said with a small smile. She turned, her eyes soft. "I couldn't sleep." He walked closer. "Still scared?" She shook her head slowly. "Not anymore." A quiet moment passed between them. Then she asked softly, "Do you regret it?" James looked at her, and for the first time since everything began, he smiled without hesitation. "No." He reached for her hand and held it gently. "I've never been more sure of anything." In that moment, there were no more titles, no more distance, no more fear, just two people who had lost everything and found something far more valuable in return. A simple life, a peaceful home, and a love that had survived everything meant to destroy it. And this time, no one was going to take it away.